This is Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs of Web Yeshiva coming to you with a conversation with my friend and colleague, Rabbi Daniel Korobkin. Rabbi Korobkin is the rabbi of the Bayit in Toronto. He's also currently serving as the president of the Rabbinical Council of America, and he is a staff member here at Web Yeshiva, where he gives a weekly course on the Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed. This is a really, for us, very exciting partnership between Web Yeshiva and his congregation in normal times, in non-corona times. On Monday mornings after services, he gathers with members of his congregation and they open the texts, and they've been studying now for about 2 years, chapter by chapter, week by week, making their way through the monumental work of medieval Jewish philosophy, the Moreh, Nevukhim, the Guide for the Perplexed. And about a year ago, we started broadcasting his classes live in front of his studio audience of congregants in Toronto to all of you here on Web Yeshiva through Facebook Live. And we're very glad that we've been able to do this, and it's had a wonderful response. And we thought it would be interesting to chat a little bit with Rabbi Korobkin about what he's doing in the Guide for the Perplexed. So tell me, Rabbi Korobkin, how did you come to have such an interest in communicating these ideas, these 12th century Jewish philosophical ideas, to your students and to your congregants? What are you getting at in the teaching of the Moreh Nevukhim?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this conversation, Rabbi Sachs, and thanks for the opportunity to share the class with those who attend WebYeshiva.org. Well, I've been involved with medieval Jewish philosophy for most of my rabbinic career. I got into it originally because I found most of the medieval writings to be very accessible, not very highly technically philosophical, but rather more theological in content. And a number of years ago, I got very interested in a book called The Kuzari by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, which was written about 50 years before the Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed, the Moreh Nevukhim.
Which I should tell our readers, you have published your own translation and commentary on the Kuzari.
Yes, it's with Feldheim Publishers. And in becoming involved with the Kuzari, it became apparent that it's almost like pulling at a thread on a larger garment, is that you really can't study the Kuzari properly unless you have a complement of studying Maimonides as well. And in many ways, although not completely, but in many ways, they almost are bookends of Jewish thought in the medieval world, because the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi takes an approach of being an anti-philosopher, as being someone who feels that while intellect is a very valuable tool in trying to understand God and the Torah, sometimes it can be almost a disadvantage. And the Rambam felt that the intellect is the sole vehicle to arriving at an understanding of God and Torah, and it is the only necessary way to acquire that closeness. And so when you look at the two of them and you sort of hold them up together, they make actually a very nice complement for any Jew who's seeking sort of a path and a way of approaching God, is because one says there's a spiritual essence to the Jew that transcends intellect, and the other one says, no, there's a very rational and intellectual way to go about this. And I think that there's an appeal to all of us at different times and at different stages of our lives, whether we wish to take a more metaphysical, spiritual approach, or whether we wish to take a more rational, intellectual approach.
You're now about 50 some odd chapters into the first of the 3 sections of the Moreh Nevukhim in your weekly study. In trying to translate, which I put in air quotes, because we're not just translating the words, we're also trying to conceptually translate what the Rambam is saying. What do you find are some of the ideas that have most either resonated or triggered or engaged your students that they've encountered so far in the Moreh Nevukhim?
Well, I mean, I think that at this stage of the work, where we're still just in the first of the 3 sections, what's most important that I think people have understood about the Rambam is that The Rambam is of the opinion that if a person is not mentally engaged in trying to understand the world and understand God, then they're not really a fully devoted Jew. You could be going through the process of doing mitzvot your entire life, but if you're not mentally engaged in the process of trying to connect with some higher power that's running the entire universe, it's almost like you've defeated the primary purpose of what the exercise of mitzvot is all about. The book of Moreh Nevukhim starts with the premise that the two most important intellectual concepts for any Jew to grasp in life are what's called Ma'aseh V'Reishit and Ma'aseh Merkava. And the Rambam explains these terms philosophically and says that what Ma'aseh V'Reishit means is that a Jew has an obligation to understand the physical world around him or her and to try and make sense of it as the environment in which God deposited me in, and he wants me to understand it and appreciate it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put me here. And Ma'aseh Merkava is the metaphysical realm where God resides, and God wants me to have a relationship with him by understanding him and appreciating him for whom he is. And that, I think, is very appealing to people because the Rambam takes a holistic approach. It's not a particularistic approach that perhaps someone like Rebbe Yehuda Halevi would take, which is that as long as you study the Torah's texts and the Talmudic texts and the Midrashic texts, and you stay faithful to that very particular line of following the Jewish path, then you have fulfilled your purpose. The Rambam takes a much broader universalistic approach that you have to understand the whole world. And it's not just enough to study Torah, you have to study the whole world around you, because really Torah encompasses every discipline and every science and every aspect of the world around us.
Those are ideas that are, of course, very resonant with those of us in the early 21st century trying to construct religious lives and identities, communities in which we can be both, fully committed to our Jewish principles, our Jewish halachic principles, our Jewish ethical and intellectual principles, but also fully citizens of the world and embrace the best that science and culture have to give to us. It's part of the reason that the Moreh Nevukhim has remained a classic for 800 years. But
let me also point out, though, that when we study it chapter by chapter, and we don't just extract, the attractive snippets from the Moreh Nevukhim, we also discover the liability of relying too much on a rational approach to Judaism. And that is that the Rambam was fully committed to Aristotelianism as a means or as a tool of explaining the world around us. And what we've discovered in getting a little bit knee-deep into Aristotelian and Neoplatonic philosophy, which was in vogue in the Rambam's time in this 12th century Islamic milieu where the Rambam finds himself in, is that the Rambam takes it as gospel, if you'll forgive the metaphor. He takes it as gospel that the way Aristotle explained the world is the way the world runs. And when we look back at it, a lot of this has not aged well in terms of what we understand about the natural sciences today. And we recognize that the Rambam may have become a victim of his own system, and where he completely commits himself to the physics of the way people understand it in his time, can sometimes turn out to be something that is disproved later on in a later era. So what we're learning from the Rambam not only is the virtue and the value of taking a rational approach to understand the world around us, but we're also learning not to fall into the trap of accepting as gospel the conventional wisdom of the day, and that we have to appreciate that this is how we understand it now. And if we can appreciate it based on conventional wisdom, that can enhance our knowledge of God and the universe. But at the same time, we have to be open to the fact that we may discover something new tomorrow that will completely overturn our understanding of the natural sciences.
The Rambam, of course, professionally functioned as a physician to the royal courts in Egypt and elsewhere. And in different passages in the Moreh, but also in the Mishnah Torah, in his halachic work, he gives medical guidance on things which today are completely debunked. And in a conversation I had recently with a particular Maimonidean scholar who said, no sane person today, or very, very few people who would probably think them crackpots, would follow strictly the Rambam's medical advice, which is counter to everything we know about medicine today. But in so doing, in rejecting the Maimonidean medical code, we would be actually acting as the most Maimonidean of all, because his first commitment was to truth, to science, and I guess it's anachronistic to speak about the scientific method in the 12th century, but the idea that science is always correcting itself. And even if it will be proved to be mistaken in this moment, we have faith in science because it moves us towards greater understanding as we go along. And in that regard, it really is something that resonates very much with us. These are just a taste of some of the topics that one would be exposed to in a careful study of the Moreh Nevukhim. And we invite all of our students and all of our listeners and all of you out there in the internet world to join us on Monday mornings, Toronto time, Eastern time, later in the afternoon if you're here in Israel or wherever you happen to be on the planet. You can easily align your clock to Rabbi Koropkin's and to Toronto to join the live Facebook broadcast at
7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Eastern time in Toronto at facebook.com/WebYeshiva. That's facebook.com/WebYeshiva. And if you can't participate live, you can catch the recording and the archive of a year's worth of these rather short shiurim on each chapter of the Moreh Nevukhim. And I know Rabbi Koropkin is most welcome to receive feedback and questions from students from all over the world, and we'd be happy to hear from you as we at WebYeshiva always are. Visit us at WebYeshiva.org to sample our array of live, interactive, ongoing shiurim, classes, and courses at WebYeshiva.org. Thank you, Rabbi Koropkin.
Thank you, Rabbi Sachs.